This is number 10 of 11 sessions. We've had a very busy 2 weeks. The programme offers a series of knowledge sharing sessions on topics that you've told us are important and of interest to you. Today's event is on design codes. So this summer learning programme is brought to you by Homes England's new local government capacity centre. And this slide summarises who we are and what we do. The Local Government Capacity Centre develops, curates and designs well-structured, accessible offers for local government with an aim of increasing capacity and skills to make homes happen in the short, medium and long term. We've launched the centre following extensive research and consultation with you across local government and with a whole range of other partners to determine where authorities need most support and how this can best be delivered. And this summer learning programme is one of our first initiatives. So here's the agenda for today. So once I've finished here, we're going to move on to Andy von Bradsky, the Chief Architect from MHCLG. I'm delighted to have him with us, and he's going to give his thoughts, and there'll be time for a very short Q&A. Pop your questions in the chat. And then we'll hear from the Homes England design team. We'll hear from Lee Johnson, Head of Master Development and Design, and representatives from her team. And then it'll be back to me, and I'd really like to hear your feedback on what you thought of the session and where we should go next in terms of topics. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Andy von Bradsky from MHCLG, the government's Chief Architect. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you very much, Victoria, and I hope you can hear me okay. Everything good?
Yes, perfect.
Good, excellent. You can see I'm in Marsham Street. We are working in the office these days, so it's great to be able to speak to a virtual audience. I can't believe the size of this audience. It's absolutely extraordinary, and I think that sort of just reflects the interest that there is in this particular subject and in design quality generally. Could I have the next slide, please? So, yeah, just on that, what I'm going to cover is not just design coding, but also how design quality sits in the planning system. And I'll go into a lot of detail around the coding work because I know that that's of interest. And I'll touch on a few other issues along the way. Next slide. So design quality is something that this government is very passionate about. Our Secretary of State has sort of been promoting the work on design quality that previous Secretaries of State and housing ministers have been promoting, and that goes back to perhaps 2016 when the Housing White Paper recognised the importance of housing quality as well as the importance of housing supply. And as an architect, I was drafted in to help with promoting this and to do the work in terms of developing not just guides, but also the detailed coding work. So I rather cheekily in my introduction suggested that I was a 5 out of 5 in terms of expertise. Of course, that's not the case, but I'm an architect with considerable background experience of this, and it's been a pleasure and a delight for me to have supported ministers along the way. I suppose the last major announcement that was made around this was back at the end of January when the National Model Design Code and the response to the Building Better Commission report was announced by the Secretary of State. And that marked the beginning of a consultation process on the coding work and on the changes to the MPPF, which I'll talk about. And he states here very clearly that these are central pillars. They are major planks to the planning system, and that the balance between quality and quantity is rebalanced, if you like, and quality is equally as important as quantity in the planning system. Next slide. And why are we doing all this? I think it's pretty obvious to many people that whilst we have some really good examples of well-designed places, there's an awful lot of poor design around the country, and the Place Alliance housing audit back in early 2020 that was issued actually illustrated very specifically deficits in quality in terms of character, spaces between buildings, how streets are laid out, their walkability and car dependence, the environmental aspects and the lack of regard to some of those wider environmental impacts. And of course, the huge variety of experience across the country in terms of regionality and response to quality in different parts of the country where perhaps value is more challenging and achieving the quality objectives is more of a task. So next slide. So you will know, of course, the background to this, that government set up the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission back in 2019, and it was chaired, of course, by the late Sir Roger Scruton, and that was actually set up as a consequence of Policy Exchange Report, which was recommending that we look back at some of the issues around quality and beauty in particular. That led, of course, to the Living with Beauty report, which came out in 2020, and there have subsequently been a response to that, to their recommendations. It's still worth a good read, particularly the summary, which lists out all the recommendations. And you might actually sort of understand just the road that's been travelled in terms of making changes to the planning system as a consequence very much of this influential report. Next steps, next slide. So the National Planning Policy, which came out in 2018, I believe, actually included, of course, the Chapter 12, Achieving Well-Designed Places. And subsequent to that, there have been a series of planning practice guidance, which of course culminated in the release of the National Model Design Code and the guidance notes that support it. Those planning practice guidance notes need to be all read together. They all relate closely to each other, and the processes and the systems and the approach and the principles are all woven through the various aspects of the planning practice guidance. And of course, the NPPF makes it clear that these are material consideration in planning decisions. Next slide. As you know, the NPPF was amended to reflect some of the recommendations from the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission report, using the word beauty, beautiful, and putting placemaking as a strategic objective of the planning system, and local authorities being expected to produce design codes placing more emphasis on the importance of coding in the planning system, and that good design should be approved and that poor quality can be refused, and that's obviously been the case for a while, but more emphasis being placed on that. And then a latest initiative to make sure that all streets are lined with trees, and that is placed in the NPPF as a policy objective. So where we are at the moment with the consultation that came out at the beginning of February is that we will be issuing very soon revisions to the NMDC, the National Model Design Code, and to the NPPF, which reflect the consultation that has taken place. We had significant response, a lot of support, and a lot of very constructive comments, and we'll be issuing these documents in the current planning system imminently. So look out for that. It's just worth saying that even though we are responding obviously to consultation in the appropriate way, there will be no significant departure from the principles that have been set out in both of those documents. Next slide. So how does this all relate? It relates back to the National Design Guide, which was published and sets out what government's understanding and expectation is for well-designed places, or you might call beauty in place of well-designed. So design codes and guides should be applying those 10 characteristics of well-designed places. And if you read the first 3 sections of the National Model Design Code, you will see the objectives and the purpose of coding and how it might be applied in a very succinct series of sections, which actually set out the objectives, the wider objectives of health, well-being, green, sustainable, distinctive, and all of those sort of issues are embraced, if you like, in the climate, character and community circles around those 10 characteristics. I won't go through the 10 characteristics because I think we've done a lot of work on promoting the National Design Guide, and I'll just focus on how this is applied to coding. The next slide. So the only thing I would say about it is that whilst the NPPF talks about sustainable development, the guide taken as an overall piece actually refers to how sustainability can be achieved through good design, social sustainability, community building, economic sustainability, how you ensure that developers engage and participate and apply the guidance, and environmental sustainability, which of course is becoming an increasingly important aspect of delivery. And in the NPPF, I should have mentioned perhaps that the UN sustainable goals, sustainability goals are mentioned and are referred to in a more direct way as to achieving sustainable development. And one thing that the guide does do is actually say these are the things that are coming forward into the future: mobility, different ownership models, an aging society, AI, issues about electric cars and so on. All of these things need to be thought of by local authorities in preparing their own design guides. Next slide. The guide also just mentions about what is good design and signposts to projects around the country which have delivered good design. So, you know, we've got some of the best designers, the best developers in the country, and we can deliver high quality. The issue is not wanting all schemes to be award-winning, but raising the bar and making the average good and the bad better, and raising the bar generally across the whole of our house building industry. Next slide. So turning to the codes, these are the documents. As you know, you'll have seen them being published. You've probably gone through them. They relate very closely and they need to be understood and read together. And we're making that a little bit more obvious in the new iterations. There is part 1 and a part 2 here. And the National Model Design Code is effectively a process, and the guidance notes give good design advice about how coding will be informed by good urban design principles. So the guidance notes effectively is one of the very rare things that government produces, which actually sets out what good design is and how good design might be applied through good urban design principles. So what is this? It's effectively guidance to local planning authorities on the production of codes, guides and policies. Clearly, coding is used by developers across the industry in different ways, but this toolkit is effectively directed towards local planning authorities. It gives them the design considerations that need to be thought about. It relates specifically back to the 10 characteristics, but ultimately this is a toolkit that needs to be applied locally. So this is all about setting up your own local design guides, your own codes and policies in local plans and in other supplementary documents. I would say, though, that it's also a good resource for urban design that can be used to assess applications, and it can be used in a variety of ways, and it collects together a very in-depth understanding of what constitutes good urban design, good architecture, good landscaping principles to be followed. So it has a wider application. Next slide. What we did in terms of pulling this very voluminous piece of work together was liaise across government, and that was one of the sort of pleasures, if you like, of this, was actually working with Department of Transport, with BEIS colleagues, with DEFRA, Home Office, Cabinet Office. Even the Department for Education were involved very heavily in some aspects of the documents. So we have been able to reflect Manual for Street principles, and of course the document supports the new iteration for Manual for Streets and doesn't conflict with it. Gear change principles have come out more recently. The implications of the Environment Bill are sort of covered. We liaise very closely with Natural England and DEFRA on emerging green infrastructure standards, which are coming forward, and of course on sustainability. Within the document, you'll see reference to latest thinking around modern methods of construction and how coding can actually sort of make use or facilitate, if you like, the productivity of the industry through modern methods of construction. So it is effectively as comprehensive a picture of what government actually thinks about good design as it's possible to be at this stage. And I would say that, you know, when new guidance does come out, we will have to keep on top of the issues within the coding document to make sure that it covers any new emerging advice. Next slide. So how do you apply this coding work? This is for local planning authorities, but the first thing I would say is the importance of collaboration with communities and with developers and landowners. So whilst it can be done in isolation by very well-trained and appropriately skilled consultants or in-house teams, ultimately the test is how does it reflect community preferences, and is it buildable, is it deliverable, can developers and landowners work with the code. So the process of doing that is expected to be more consultation and collaborative. It needs to be flexibly applied, so it could be at county level, and we already have some engagement with some counties that are looking at the key principles for a county-wide approach. More likely a local authority approach, even more likely a neighbourhood or a site approach. So it can be applied at different scales and at different levels with different appropriate levels of detail and specific guidance advice. It needs to be informed by a wider objective from local authorities. So it's not just about a standalone piece, it needs to fit within the local plan objectives. And at the end of the day, we are promoting it at the moment to be applied at a local level. So how you apply it is really going to be down to your own understanding of the principles and how you apply it locally. Next slide. I've mentioned that part one is a coding process. Although it's called National Model Design Code, it is not in itself a code. It is a process for creating a code. So you might say it's mistitled, but I think most people are understanding that at the end of the day, it's a staged process. Three key stages: baseline understanding of the area, selection of the area, understanding it, doing characterization studies, and so on. Having a vision for that area, and that is through consultation, engagement, and collaborative approach, as I mentioned before. From that vision comes a master plan and a coding plan. Master planning really for larger scale developments, and then the guidance that needs to sit behind that coding plan and the master plan being developed further. Consultation woven right the way through into the detail. Next slide. So consultation is a fundamental part of this, and I want to come back to this at the end of the presentation, which is about, you know, how do we engage local authorities, how do we engage their how do we engage communities within local authorities, which might be at a larger scale or at a site-specific scale, and how do we make sure that they're skilled enough, trained enough, and engaged enough in the process. And I see that as being one of the key challenges, which I'm sure will come up in discussion later. Next slide. So the coding, the National Model Design Code lists out a whole series of design parameters, which are drawn effectively from the 10 characteristics and color coded in the same way. There are 7 characteristics that you would expect to see in all design codes, and they're listed there. There are other aspects of quality and performance and management that need to be equally considered, and they might be in local plans, but they could also be in design codes. This isn't a tick list. This is just really a checklist of issues that might be important, might not be important. It depends on the nature of the area that the code is being applied to. So character might be really important in some areas where infrastructure is involved, movement and public spaces, streets might be really an important theme. And then, of course, in some communities, well, I would say in all communities, nature is such an important component, but in some areas it's going to be more important than in others. Next slide. So how do you start? Well, you need this baseline information that I mentioned earlier. You need to understand the nature of the site. You need to map it. And we're doing quite a lot of work in the ministry at the moment about digitizing this information and making sure that it's in a similar format that all local authorities can apply their analysis to. It's an interesting piece of work going on at the moment. But understanding the context, understanding the heritage aspects, the local vernacular, the higher up the street or the infrastructure aspects, open space and facilities, all of these things help inform what a coding should be. Next slide. And then the design vision. It's not really what is the nature of the space, the place at the moment, but it's what that place might be into the future. So actually having a vision for which type of area, what kind of space needs to be developed on a site or in an area. And obviously getting communities involved in that process is vital, because they often know a lot more about the area than the consultants who they might be working with, or the local planning authority. So getting communities involved in that vision, really important. Next slide. We've come up with this idea of area types, which is effectively a way in which you might categorize the nature of a place. So a place might be a very high density inner city area, or it might be a town or city centre. It could be an urban neighbourhood. It could be a suburban neighbourhood. It could be rural, could be villages. So we've just set out 10 area types that we think are a good starting point. And then we just demonstrated on this map how areas might actually be categorized in terms of their character. Quite a complex issue, you know, particularly in urban areas, how you do this. And we don't say that all 10 of these are covering every aspect. I think it's important that local areas might actually create their own additional ones that need to be added to. This is the basis of design coding, in effect. Next slide. Master planning needs to follow that particular process for large-scale developments, and even within a master plan, particularly of a larger scale, say 1,500 or more, you are likely to have different area types within it. Each area type can be mapped. Each area type can have its own very specific coding and very specific metrics. It needs to be very, very simple, very precise. Needs to lead to very specific outcomes that are well structured and well catalogued. Next slide. And this is the sort of metric that you might arrive at. So a three-dimensional model, it could be detailed, it could be quite outlined, it could be design parameters in a very sort of general sense, but the most important aspect are those metrics that sit alongside it. We've just picked out 3 of those area types and demonstrated that each of those would have slightly different metrics to them. These are not requirements, by the way, these are just sort of indicative, and it's a sort of a demonstration of what you might come up with. So in terms of density, in terms of party wall, in terms of block types, building line, setbacks, eaves. So these are things that can actually be sort of measurable change, measurable requirements. We think that design coding can be done simply, it can be done effectively, and it doesn't necessarily need to be very long-winded. It should be a simple process to do this. Next slide. So the guidance on those area types is in the main document. Actually highlights the issues that need to be thought of in terms of parking, for instance, or street types, the type of built form that might exist, and the area types need to be sort of explained and given that sort of attention to the detail. Next slide. And within that document is also area-wide coding. So rather than just a code-wide approach, rather than just an area-wide approach. So this could be across a series of area types. In this case, for example, nature and biodiversity might be an overarching theme that covers different area types. And again, guidance is given on that. Next slide. I won't go into all of the detail that's in the guidance notes. You'll see that it is called now Part 2, National Model Design Code Guidance Notes, and it contains a huge amount of information on how you might approach it. None of it is expected to be sort of followed as a mantra. It's really just giving you an indication of the kind of issues that need to be thought of and some suggestions about how you might approach it. We've been style neutral around it. There was obviously some concern initially that this might be actually in some way dictating an architectural approach, but that's not the case. It's really intended to be a very sort of localized approach. So anything to do with style needs to be determined at a local level and with communities. Next slide. Returning to the theme of community engagement, this is probably one of the key themes that we have within the coding approach, is that how do we bring that democracy forward, as it's so called, in terms of using the input from communities to inform what a code might contain. Clearly, if it's some kind of SPD and a requirement of a three-dimensional aspect in local plans, it needs to have that community support. So how do we do that? And there are lots of examples of having done this well around the country, lots of agencies that do this in a very sophisticated way on face-to-face, so workshops, charrettes, walking audits. But you know, in recent months, we've obviously become much more reliant on digital exchange. So some companies have sort of set up a much more interactive approach through digital methods. And so how do we make use of that? So this is an emerging and evolving sort of aspect to the coding work, and we will be hoping that local authorities will be able to find ways in which they can demonstrate and prove that communities are supportive of the coding work that's coming forward. Next slide. So what are we doing now? We launched at the same time in February the testing program. This is taking all of the work that we've done and applying it to in different areas around the country to just test whether the National Model Design Code works at different levels, at different scales, and whether it's county-wide or site-specific. Whether it's for regeneration, historic environments, urban regeneration, and we have a few very large-scale new settlements again, which we're sort of testing. So these are the places. 14 places were announced after the local elections recently, and they're all engaging in a very intensive way. And it's a delight to be involved in it, actually, and you're hearing very directly from these places what they think of the code. Most are sort of using it in a very creative and constructive way. The feedback has been extremely good. This slide is available, and so for local authorities wanting to know more, I'm pretty sure the network of local planning authorities will be willing to sort of share their information. The Planning Advisory Service, supported by UCL, are doing monitoring and evaluation. So they too are learning what these 14 places are learning themselves, and that will be subject to some dissemination later in the year. It's a 6-month program, and we're probably halfway through now, so we're expecting an interim report pretty soon, and there'll be a final report coming out towards the end of September. Next slide. So a common theme and one specific for today, I guess, is, how do we get skills in coding into the system? It's clearly an issue. Government recognises that. So one of the key things that has been set up is Office of Place. It's a new entity that is chaired by Nicholas Boyd-Smith, who co-authored the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission report, and it was recommended to be set up by its own report, and is effectively a transition board at this stage. And its objective is really to promote design coding within the planning system. But I would sort of just shine a light on some of the other initiatives that are going on at the moment. Public Practice, a really worthy organisation that's promoting the use of urban designers, landscape architects and architects in local planning authorities, and it's doing a great job in placements for local planning authorities. They are very supportive and knowledgeable about this particular area. Urban Design London is doing a coding school, and other design network organisations are also doing their own thing to promote coding work. So Design Southeast, for example, are doing a similar thing. The one thing I have included in this is a link. I'm hoping it works when you get the slide pack, but I would urge you to look at the NMDC film. There's a link there. It's on YouTube. And it features Joanna Aveley, myself, Jane Dan, who authored or co-authored the National Design Guide, and David Rudlin from Urbed, who, Jane's from Tibbles, and David Rudlin from Urbed, who co-authored the National Model Design Code. I say co-authored because this was very much an iterative thing between the design team, myself, and the consultants to arrive at what we think is something that represents the best of what industry can produce. Next slide. It'd be wrong for me to go through the whole process without mentioning planning reform. You'll know that this is being discussed and being considered at the moment. We are currently reviewing the very extensive consultation that came forward. A lot of detailed work is going on behind the scenes about what planning reform might constitute. It's not possible for me to give you any more information than that at this stage, and you'll probably not find many officials or anybody from government talking openly about planning reform until we've got all the issues sorted. But one thing is clear, that design coding will form a major plank of any reform system. It's going to be applied in the current planning system, and it will no doubt be applied in a reform system. So best to start now and to look at how coding might apply to your own local authority. Big issues coming around the corner, of course, in terms of climate change, net zero. the levelling up agenda, digital transformation. I mentioned about the work that we're doing on that at the moment, and continuing work on building safety, which does feed back into the planning system as stage one of the stepped approach to monitoring safety of designs. And just finally, is worth saying, next slide, it's just finally worth saying that in terms of Homes England, we are doing a lot of work with Homes England. Obviously, we are effectively the client agency for their work, and we're looking at how these initiatives, how design quality feeds into their programs. And we've already obviously got involved in influencing the quality aspects within garden communities, and have, are effectively the client for a number of new major opportunities like the Oxcam corridor and so forth. So very much supporting what Homes England are doing, and very much iterations with Lee, her team, who are doing a fantastic job in supporting the promoting of design quality within Homes England programmes. That's the end of my presentation. Victoria, happy to take questions.
Thank you, and ahead of time. Brilliant presentation on a huge piece of work, and a piece of work that's taken quite a while to come to fruition, but a great overview for everybody. And initially, I thought that you and I were going to have to maybe have a bit of a chit chat for the next 10 minutes, but the questions have actually come in thick and fast. So if you're quite, I did put a note in the chat to say that sadly that you will be leaving CLG in the end of the summer, so this was a great opportunity for people to put you on the spot, and it seems to have worked. So if you're happy, I'm just going to kick off with some questions. So the amount of time, what amount of time and resource, and I think he's talking about staff qualification and cost, is a local authority design code like to require? And by qualification, he means skills and training, i.e., are they going to need urban designers in-house to draw up the 3D illustrations, or do you feel the toolkit could do, the code could do more than that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a recurring question. I'm just looking at the chat now and just realised how many questions have come through, and I'll do my best to answer as many as possible. Firstly, about my departure, getting to this point with a design guide and a code has been a seminal moment for me. It's been a really interesting piece of work, and it moves to another stage now. So for me, it's moving aside and letting others sort of drive it forward, but I will still be around. So if you need me, do let me know. On the question that you've asked about skills, is it in-house? Is it something that goes outside of your local authority, or is it something that you have to nurture and develop within your local authority? I think that's the nub of it. My personal view of this is that in the testing programme, we've got sort of almost 3 categories of skills. We've got local authorities who are employing external consultants, who we know and we trust, and we know that they're going to do a good job. There are local authorities that have a good urban design sort of caucus and have the skills and know how to apply this. And then there are local authorities that don't have any of that, and using sort of nurturing their own skills. And it's quite obvious that the middle group are the ones that need to be developed much more of. So local authorities need to have the skills within their departments. They need urban design capability. They need architects, landscape architects. Now, I know that's an issue in terms of resourcing and skills, but I think that has to be the direction of travel for this. You can't rely on expensive external consultants to deliver all of this work. The other aspect for all of this is the collaborative approach. So you also need to have developers working with you to develop this as well. So, if you have the right bar, the bar for quality, and you have the right developer, they can help shape what the coding work can be through an interactive approach. So collaborate with developers is the other message.
I think that leads in quite nicely, because there's been quite a few questions about the timing of the code, of the application of a code. So someone, I think it's Joan Bromley's asked, how should design codes be effectively incorporated into local plan making where we have pressures to move quickly? Is it integral or does it come after sites have been allocated? And I think that there's an opportunity there. I would hope that there's a collaboration approach, and just be interested to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a planner, so I find some of the processes that you go through still. So I'm not an expert in it. I know broadly what's needed, but I think focusing on allocated sites must be the first step, and understanding what a landowner or a developer might be thinking of for that particular development is going to be. That's the obvious thing to be doing. And start there and start. I mean, the whole purpose of coding at the end of the day is to fix the quality in the land price. So the earlier you can get it into the planning system before developers come forward, effectively, the better. So that the price of land is effectively embedded the quality is embedded in the price of the land. So there's issues about timing and getting that timing right.
Yeah, it's like we've rehearsed this, Andy. That's the opportunity where Homes England can hopefully play a role to demonstrate that with our land holdings.
Yeah.
Another question that's come up is, what role can county councils play in design coding in areas where local plans are produced by district and borough councils? Again, that's
Okay. Yeah, I mean, this has sort of been quite interesting for us in terms of understanding what what happens at different levels. At county level, I think the obvious county that is ahead of the game on this is Essex, and it goes way back to the Essex design guide that many of us oldies will remember the use of quite extensively, and they have an up-to-date sort of version of the same thing. So they effectively set out principles, quite high-level principles. There's an interesting difference between a design guide and a design code. A design code is intended to be quite specific and relate very specifically to a site, but you'll see in all the advice that codes and guides are both relevant to can use the National Model Design Code. So a guide at a sort of county level could be quite high level, it could be quite strategic, but it could also set out some of the key issues, the key challenges for that county. So, for example, streets and how streets are designed could be a county-wide sort of initiative, and it could form the basis of guidance that then gets applied locally by district councils or by boroughs. So I think counties can do a good job in terms of setting out templates for community engagement, and we're talking to one of the pilots about how they do that for neighbourhood planning, believe it or not. So there are ways in which the county can actually set up initiatives that show how their high-level priorities could be applied at a local level. At the end of the day, though, it is about applying site-specific criteria at a local level. But nevertheless, the county can provide a good stepping stone or platforms or templates for that to happen.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time now, and I know Victoria's keeping us to a tight time programme. I think she's put in the chat, actually, that we're going to follow up on it because we've had some great questions, and I think a lot of them will be of real interest, Andy, to your team as well, so that we can keep evolving and making sure that we respond correctly to it. So we can follow that up. But I think for the moment, we just have to say thank you for your contribution today and the work.
Thank you very much.
And we'll follow up on that. But some great questions coming in, and we'll have to deal with them separately after the event. Thank you.
Thanks.
So I think it's straight into me now. So the next part of the session is pretty much from Homes England and how we are working as the government's housing agency. We remain a mission-based organisation, and our role really is to intervene in the market to ensure more homes are built. But we do need to ensure that quantity does not trump quality. We have a new chair who has a very clear understanding of the importance and benefits of good quality placemaking and what they can deliver. And we continue to work closely with our colleagues at CLG to support and operationalise the emerging guidance and policy in our role as the government's housing agency. One of the agency's key responsibilities is bringing public land suitable for housing to the market. And with land holdings of over 8,500 hectares and over 600 active projects, we are by far and away the largest residential land agent and master developer in the country. And just leading on from some of those questions and discussions with Andy, a lot of our land holdings are at allocation stage. So there is a real opportunity for us to look at the model and the toolkit that is set out in the code to see how we can start to establish quality. By selling land to the market and working with partners to build our own sites, it gives us a fantastic platform to lead by example by designing great places and ensuring developments on our land are well considered. And this new model design code as a tool gives us an opportunity to work with local planning authorities on these sites, irrespective of their scale or status within the planning process. And it will give us a real chance to embed quality and the mandate to expect more for when the sites come to the market. So the next part of the session, you're going to hear from colleagues from our planning and engagement team and the design and master development team, who are both internal facing. They work with MHCLG and colleagues on our programmes and policies, but also external facing. So how we engage with the industry, how we influence our own land holdings and our delivery partners to translate and operationalise new policy and to ensure more and better quality homes and places are built. So I'm going to hand over now to Richard Hodson, who's from our planning team.
Hi, thank you, Lee. So yes, I'm Richard Hodson. I'm the Senior Town Planning Manager for Homes England, and I'm part of the National Town Planning team. I lead on planning policy for the agency. So next slide, please. So how can design codes, design guides help local authorities and us as an agency, as a master developer and an enabler to work with our developer partners? Now, the design guide lists key principles for good placemaking, whether that's good architecture, good landscape architecture, and what we need to bring together to create good places. Now, can we pick and choose the critical elements to form effectively a blueprint for the end user that's going to use these guides and use these codes? And if we apply this as a framework or as a toolkit, it can provide the consistency in the approach that I think everyone is really after. But I think it's also an opportunity to help local authorities, communities, developers come together to decide what the really important things are for a scheme or for an area, to decide what the issues are that we want to develop policies for. Next slide, please. Now, the new NPPF highlights the need to start preparing guides and codes, and this in turn raises concerns, which I think a lot of people have raised in the chat, on support, resources and skills. But principally, it does provide the policy backing to use guides and to use design codes. And I think this is really effective in helping to shape an area. So if design quality can be championed and owned at the local level, and if you can identify where design is failing, whether it's the developer, whether it's the local authority, political intervention, local requirements, for instance, then you can really start to focus on the areas that you want to address and you want to target. Next slide, please. So in terms of output, if we can agree at the start what the targeted outcome is at the outset, what the desired outcome is for everyone that's involved in this, then I think we can provide flexibility for solutions, having sufficient technical, commercial, and end developer input into the production. And this gives us greater opportunities to succeed and also to enable codes to stand the test of time. And I think that flexibility is really key in terms of how to produce effective and successful design codes. Also, if used effectively, it provides certainty for the communities, it provides certainty for developers, and it provides certainty for local authorities. It can speed up the planning process, the planning decision-making process, and ultimately the delivery of new homes and new communities. But remember, not every area will be trying to address the same issues through the use of guides and codes. But if we can work together to promote the process as a way of de-risking sites, de-risking schemes, and also a marketing tool for developers, I think this will ultimately lead to success. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. So I'm Chris. I'm the Senior Community Engagement Manager for Homes England. I just wanted to pick up a little bit on what Andy's already mentioned about just the importance and focus of community engagement in the design coding process. And just a little bit about what Homes England is doing in terms of community engagement. So just dip onto the next one, please. It's obviously in there. You've read the guidance, I'm sure you have. And, you know, local authorities are the best placed people to engage with their communities. Having worked for one for quite a long time, you know, you guys know what it's all about, and you know what your communities need, and you know how to engage different people at different stages. All what this is trying to get at is that we understand that importance. And just a list there of some of the benefits of really effective community engagement and what we believe it's all about. And I'm sure you'd agree with most of those down there. We really advocate that, and we are advocating that across all our projects that the agency does. Just the next and the last one for me. So what we have is we've got a newish team, and we've got a range of different work streams. And we've got a sort of strategy. I guess it's not a really detailed one, but hopefully it's a fairly succinct but impactful one. And that's coming out fairly soon. We've got an emerging definition. Quite a lot of that definition is sort of harnessed or harvested from the National Model Design Code. Hopefully you see some resonance in there. It'd be grateful to see what your feedback is on that. You know, is that the sort of thing you would expect an agency like ourselves to have in terms of how it defines community engagement? Anything in the chat or afterwards, I'd be very, very grateful for any feedback you have. On all our community engagement projects, at whatever stage we are involved in, or whatever stage our projects are at, we advocate this sort of phased approach. And a key part of that is looking to do some sort of co-design. So we might come up with some research, we might do some definition of what we're looking to do and how we're going to do community engagement, perhaps, but work with others. Let's do some co-design and try and refine how we're going to go about that engagement activity, and then go ahead and deliver it. Some co-commissioning would be great as well. So we're advocating that. And then just finally from me, we've developed a series of guiding principles, if you like, some sort of promises that we have, almost like a sort of protocol, really, that we expect everybody, our sub-consultants, our contractors, that when we're doing projects in your areas, this is how we expect them to demonstrably demonstrate in their community engagement activity. Behind each of those 5 blobs, there's a raft of explanations. You'll have come across these before. You've probably invented some of these yourselves as well, but we hope they really resonate with yourselves. We hope they're really relevant. You know, I think the key thing that we're trying to say here is that when you are doing your design coding, and when we are working in your area, we do hopefully get it. We are really keen to try and support and inform on that community engagement in terms of your expectations and how you want us to behave. And then just finally for me, a couple of other brief things to mention is that we are currently developing and drafting a toolkit. So that's 14 or 15 different how-to guides. It's for our internal project managers, but it's also hopefully externally relevant as well. If any of those in due course are relevant to yourselves, just give us a nudge. I'm sure we can share them with you. I'm sure we can do that. Stuff around, you know, how to reach hard to engage groups, how to develop a community engagement audit, those sorts of things that we intended not to be prescriptive, but to be helpful and supportive. And then just finally, to put it on your radar, we are hopefully going to go out to develop a framework of specialist community engagement consultants later on in the autumn, and that is open to all public sector bodies as well. So if you want to find out a little bit more about what that is, just give us a nudge, because if you do want to have some community engagement consultants, especially on board, you know, we might have got a framework in place by this time next year. That's it from me. Thanks.
Hello, my name's Dan Roberts from the Master Development and Design team, and my particular responsibility within that team is for design quality assessment within the agency. Next slide, please. There is lots of guidance and advice out there available alongside the National Model Design Code that you've just heard about. Since April 2019, Homes England have used Building for Life as an adopted design quality assessment tool to create consistency across our remit. So that forms the basis of our assessment, but we encourage the use of other tools and methods as well, such as design review and, of course, the use of codes within the work that we perform. Next slide, please. Now, Building for a Healthy Life is the latest iteration of Building for Life. It was launched in July 2020, and we adopted it in August of last year. The new version of the document takes account of the healthy living considerations that were set out in the National Health Service England publication entitled Putting Health into Place. And as a current public sector user of Building for Life, the agency was asked to advise on the practicality of the new iteration of the document as it emerged and was redrafted, in particular regarding its potential effects on deliverability and the likely acceptability of it amongst our development partners. So clearly the use of it in things like methods like coding was part of that. Next slide, please. BHL's easy to use. It's based around 12 considerations that are grouped into 3 sections. It's illustrated and quite easy to follow. And crucially, from our point of view, because we don't build houses ourselves, it's place-based. So it looks at the way in which you set the context for the housing that's to come. It provides a useful prompt for discussion throughout the development and design process. Next slide, please. So we use it more than just an assessment tool. It's a way of considering how we can sort of build towards the delivery of development through acquisition and de-risking process, through planning consent, and then on to reserve matters. Building for a Healthy Life can also be used as part of the design review process as well as informing coding. Next slide, please. It can inform the coding process because all of the schemes that come forward through Homes England now have to be Building for Healthy Life compliant. Therefore, the codes relating to our sites need to be compliant as well, and they can relate to individual sites and parcels or broader based, as Andy was talking about earlier. It can be help to structure the coding process, which may vary depending on the local context and priorities that you're looking at within the code. So the appropriate form of code can be chosen to address the scale of development or the particular deficits in the area, for example, local distinctiveness and character. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk just a little bit now about the appraisal process and how that feeds into coding. Next slide. Thanks. It's imperative to understand the context of the place before starting the coding process. The evidence base will help to explain and justify the basis of future design decisions and considerations. Many of the sites that Homes England deal with are involved in are large scale, on the edge of existing settlements, such as urban extensions and new communities. Next slide, please. It's useful to start with the historical context. Often this might be something that seems initially unapparent or unpromising, but there are always patterns and cues there to be looked at and interpreted. Must be able to translate these into the new development, not just copying for copying's sake, not just pastiche. But there's the old adage that you have to know where you've come from in order to know where you're going or where you can go, and that's why looking at the past is quite important as a starting point. Next slide, please. It's also important to look at how the constraints can feed opportunities. Poor design can be purely constraints led, and often is. So you've got to look at the way in which the opportunities are the analysis of the constraints. Constraints are actual, they're factual, they're apparent. Opportunities are possibilities and therefore can be expressed more fluidly, as the diagrams on this slide show. Next slide, please. Really important, though, is to establish a realistic site capacity. very often we see the capacity testing for a site is done as a separate exercise from the rest of the design process. And what that leads to is false expectations, unobtainable housing targets, which then burden the rest of the design process from there on in. Remembering that density is a product of design, it should not be the driver of it. So in this diagram here, an apparently large site can therefore be whittled down, as it were, with red being the fixed constraints that can't be overcome, such as things like maybe ancient woodlands, pylon standoff areas, gas pipelines, those kind of things. Amber is the flexible constraint, where something can be mitigated to allow development. And then green areas are free from constraint, the unconstrained land. Next slide, please. It's also important to consider beyond the boundaries of the site from the word go, and this is important to coding as well. So looking out with as well as within, often we only see one set of views considered, and they're usually the views that are looking into a site. Are there considerations to be made for looking out at existing features into the landscape? And if so, will these then determine viewing corridors and vistas in the proposed layout? Always bearing in mind, of course, that there are different types of view as well, such as glimpse and vista, panorama, etc. So thinking about the way in which the different types of view can be accommodated. Next slide, please. Appraisal and analysis needs to then inform the objectives for the new place. These objectives supply a vision of how people can be sustained by the creation of the new place and provide prompts for a composite plan, which in turn forms a framework or a master plan. So it's helpful to appraise the content of the different layers individually, but then to join them up and to overlay to see how the different elements can support one another. So in this case, we're looking at synergies, and the adage you would use here, I suppose, is the sum is greater than the individual parts. Next slide, please. It may seem a little ethereal, perhaps, but it is important to establish a vision for the new place that can be created and aspired to. This should be able to be simply expressed, perhaps summarized in a matter of 2 or 3 sentences, but there should be depth of thought and intention behind it. So that's where that evidence base is all important. Next slide, please. And just to sort of round this section off, in terms of building for a healthy life, therefore, you can concentrate on the more strategic elements of that can inform this higher level appraisal of an area before you start to design for it. So in other words, the big ideas that need to be established from the outset, and if not established, then it can be very difficult, if not impossible, to retrieve and rectify these at a later stage. So I think I'll finish there, and I'll hand over to Katie now. Thanks very much.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm Katie Parry. I'm a senior planning and development manager in the master development and design team at Homes England. I'm actually a planner by background rather than an urban designer, so a little bit of a different approach. So I'm just going to very briefly take you through a few different kind of approaches to coding and how to run it, kind of how to do the process. So the first thing to kind of look at is looking at your place and where to focus your time and what will last the longest. So that first image is just showing you that the things that will change quite quickly over time in a place are things like your uses and your elements. Your elements is covering things like your doors and your windows. And then you get to the other end of the scale where you're looking at streets, where I'm sure we can all kind of think of examples of Roman streets or medieval street patterns that we can see in the places that we know. The other image is showing how design quality can get watered down through that delivery process, which is what we want to try and avoid, and we can use a code to try and do that. But you can just see through that image that the planning consent that was secured was of a high quality standard, and then little by little things have been chipped away at it, and then the end constructed project doesn't deliver what the ambition was set out to at the planning stage. Next slide, please. So this is just looking at kind of some of the how to approach kind of the coding. So the key for what we do at Homes England is thinking about delivery from the outset. By outset, I mean kind of like a vision stage or a concept plan stage, framework plan. All of those stages, we need to ensure that what we're proposing is deliverable. And that's important because it's not just about testing that your code's deliverable, because your code has to be based on something that is good. Your code, you can't use a code to make a bad master plan good. It won't work. So keeping hold of what's deliverable and ensuring that what you do can be deliverable is so important. For the larger multi-phase sites, which we do quite a lot of at Homes England now, we're looking at kind of how we can shorten the process of evolving codes. So we're looking at kind of evolving our master plans and codes alongside each other, and that will help with the testing and making sure that we're confident that what we're coding for and master planning for will be deliverable on the ground. Next slide, please. So just very quickly, kind of different approaches that you can use to kind of use your limited resources to get the kind of most bang for your buck, I suppose. So one way of doing that is to look at this image on here from Adam's Architecture. Shows you that what they've done there is kind of done a heat mapping process of the place to determine where they need the most control through a code and where they can allow more flexibility. And that in that way, you can then focus your time and effort resources on the bits of the place that are going to have the biggest impact, and therefore you need the most control. And that can link back again to those places that aren't going to change as much through time. So, you know, not worrying too much about the colours of your doors and windows, but worrying more about your primary streets and your street pattern and your public realm and how they're going to work. Another way you can do it is looking at kind of key fixes and key flexibility. So looking at that kind of fix and flex approach to a plan or a master plan. And you can use that to kind of do the same sort of approach as this heat map is doing, where you can just kind of pick out which is your key frontages and then actually perhaps deeper into the parcel, where you can allow more flexibility because you don't need the same level of control across all of the site. I think I'm passing over to Amy now. I think that's my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Katie. And my slides are very linked on from what Katie's just been talking about. So I'm Amy, I'm in the same team. And if we go on to the next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit of a look back actually of one site that I worked on before I was at Homes England, but which was coded and took a long time to develop. So it's interesting to look back with the benefit of experience and see the things that worked well and didn't work so well. So this is a kind of a thing that I think is really useful to put in any codes, is to make sure that you restate what the vision and the concept for the place was, what it is that overall you're trying to achieve, because you will find that these codes need to last a long time and people won't go back and read either the outline application if they're looking at parcels. We just know they don't, or they might, you know, if it's regeneration, it takes a long time. So you need to restate the original purpose, and the best way to do that is to do something short in text terms but with images. For the code that I was working on, it was across 2 local authorities. There were at least 5 different planning officers, multiple developer design teams, different councillors. So it had to be something that could be translated to lots of different people and would stand the test of time. Next slide, please. So picking up from Katie's point about deciding what you need to code for, and that's really, you know, you need to decide what is most important. For this particular code, the street design and the green spaces, which were the kind of the bits in between the buildings, were the most important things to get right, and where the most effort was spent. Next slide, please. So how did the code achieve it? Well, it's not motherhood and apple pie. It does say things that are mandatory and detailed. It's if you like, a list of ingredients and how to put them together, like a recipe. It's not just a wish list. So the code was very specific about for the street sections and street plans. That was all agreed with the highways teams, and this code took about a year to write, just to answer some of people's comments. This is for the first phase of a large, essentially it's a town-sized development, this. So it's about 1,000 houses in total and a big community centre, 2 schools. You know, it's a big place. Being really clear in the public realm about what's adopted and what's not, and making sure that the code picks up, because that's your kind of your enforcement system, but it picks up the other strategies. So there was also a public realm strategy and a public art strategy for this particular project, and they were embedded into the code, and the code was the mechanism by which those things could be delivered alongside the legal agreements that required them. In this particular instance, the landowner delivered the big set piece public spaces, but the code then specified where incidental spaces were going to be required by the parcel house builders. I think actually on reflection, it would have been better to have a bit more about the function of those spaces. It was quite a lot about where they were going to be, but not enough about what they were going to do. Next slide, please. So you also need to decide what you want. You know, is it important to have variety or consistency, both in terms of how the streets form together and the landscape, but also in the building forms as well, and choosing what's important to you and why, based on all that context analysis that you would have done as part of the whole previous work leading up to this, and linking it back to the parcels, but also linking it back to any character areas that you may have. So this, you know, for this particular development, you can see there are things that were decided to be consistent, but actually there's quite a lot that's not, and that was a conscious decision about what was important for this code. Next slide, please. But as Katie said, you can't put a code on a master plan that hasn't been tested enough to make sure that it actually works. You can't make the code can't make a master plan resolve the problems in a master plan a lot of the time. So for this particular scheme, the master plan set out a really strong arrangement of primary streets, which the code then set to deliver. The problem we had was that we hadn't tested before we got to the reserve matter stage at enough detail how you filled in the gaps between the 2 primary streets, and we ended up with really 2.5 blocks of development, which meant we had a lot of tricky situations to deal with, which we perhaps didn't need to have done. So I think it is about really testing each stage, the master plans and codes, to make sure that they're delivering what you want to deliver. And there are examples of kind of code busting systems where people have actually brought in other bodies to try and see if they can break the code and see if they actually are getting the results they want. Next slide, please. So again, a bit like what Katie was saying, decide what you want to focus on. So for this particular code, we had RAL colours specified for every single window and door. We had rainwater goods specified. Spent a lot of time with the planning officers. We were checking all of this stuff, but actually, whilst that's great and they are better than just sort of normal, those are gradually getting changed anyway over time. And it meant that we didn't spend enough time realizing actually that there was an issue between what the developer plots were, their levels, and what the level that was set by the master developer on the highway. Just to stress, this isn't a Homes England project. This was before I was at Homes England, but this is not uncommon. You see this kind of disconnect between the levels between different landowners all the time. Next slide, please. So again, this is about being really clear about what is mandatory and what is not, and making sure where you've got a kind of nice image, is it really deliverable? So the design code intention, which was to get around the problem of having a kind of a single-sided Mews street on this code, was to have garages with accommodation above. But there just wasn't enough value in the area for that to actually be delivered. And even though it was in the code, what we ended up with was a single-sided street looking out on garages. So really, we needed to have tested the images where it's a kind of a higher risk scenario like that. We needed to have tested it more. Next slide, please. And kind of knowing this is a classic building for a healthy life type of thing. It's looking at what often goes wrong and coding to make sure that those things don't, and making those coding elements mandatory. So the things that we typically see that are going wrong and that are echoed in both the housing audit and in building for a healthy life are stuff around parking, bins, bike storage and boundary treatments. Those things are often get lost, and they're really important in terms of that kind of interface between the private realm of the buildings to the public realm of the streets. I think that's my last one, but just double check. Yes, it is. Handing to John.
Thank you, Amy. So I'm going to talk about how do we evaluate codes once they're up and running, evaluating the effects of them. So I work in the in Lee's Master Development and Design team. I'm a Senior Planning and Infrastructure Manager. Next slide. So I think it's important to recognise that codes are, I suppose, an evolving process. It may start off as a defined document, but we recognise that they're applied over time, and so we have to enable them to adapt to changing circumstances. So there's a recognition, I think, that when codes are applied, there's a process that we run through of firstly, obviously, establishing the vision and the content of the code through the master plan and the coding plan, etc. With associated guidance, etc. But then there's a need to review how the code is being applied and how effective it's being, to analyse the results of feedback from through the design process, and then perhaps to try and evolve and change the code as we are able to through the planning process as a build out of the site or sites is carried forward. This requires a commitment from all parties and a collaboration, which has been mentioned already this morning. But we need to make sure that what's happening on the ground can be flexible and can adapt to changing circumstances, whether that's market conditions or technology or changing materials. If possible, we need to enable what's built to respond to those changing circumstances and the code to respond accordingly. It may involve restating the vision as we progress through the build out, because there's a recognition that while the code may be a reference document, the people that are applying that document can change. Planning officers change jobs, new people come in, old people go out, etc. And so we need to be making sure that we're restating the vision, that people have a continual understanding of what the code is trying to achieve, and go back to it if it's not working and change it if possible. Next slide, please. I think it's important to recognise that in evaluating the code, details are important. And fine details are important. So the top images there relate to Priors Hall, which demonstrate a lack of front boundaries and leftover strips. The bottom images relate to Trumpington, where front boundaries and parking were clearly defined and tested through the code there. The point is that in evaluating how things are being delivered, checking that against the code, we have to have an eye to detail things like the colours of post boxes, for example, or make sure the colours of doors, if it's relevant, are the same shade, and there aren't these discrepancies creeping in, which when taken in totality will start to detract from what the code is trying to achieve. Next slide, please. We at Homes England have a compliance and design requirements process ongoing, and this is a regime of having independent compliance inspectors going out to the sites that we're responsible for delivering and making sure that what's being built on the ground adheres to the approved plans and what is supposed to be being built. So those people will go out, check the built product against approved plans, but also the design code as well. There's a reporting process that we instigate and confirm that what's being built is achieving performance against the design requirements. Non-compliance, we have a sort of a a lever over the developer, because non-compliance will require that will enable us to withhold certificates to developer partners who are trying to then sell on the product that they've built. So that's quite a useful lever that we have over the situation. Next slide, please. Post-occupancy evaluation. There was a report produced by REBA, I think it was front end of this year, where they went into this topic in great detail, making the point that post-occupancy evaluation, helps in both the evolution of a build out of a site as it occurs, as well as providing feedback to the industry and developers and builders in general as to what's working and what's not, and how end users are enjoying the housing that's being built. We're currently exploring the post-occupancy evaluation process and how that might be applied to our sites. And the emphasis will be for occupiers of housing. What is the place like? What's it like to live there? What does that mean as to how we deliver houses in the future? And to affect learning from that process. So I think that's the last slide I'd like to talk to. So that, I think, takes us to the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much to you, the speakers and the support team. Have a great afternoon. Thanks, bye.